This KFAN podcast is sponsored by Builders and Remodelers, exclusive Twin Cities provider of Elements Windows. Get the highest quality windows at unmatchable value. Visit buildersandremodelers.com for more details. And
hey, catch the Athletics' John Krasinski all season long with Dan Barreiro, or in this case, right now with Dave Sinekin as he breaks down all the latest local sports news, moves, and more, thanks to RBC Wealth Management.
All right, 4:02 on a Monday afternoon. It's the Bumper to Bumper program. Dave Sinekin in for Dan today. And very happy to welcome a regular Monday guest on this program. Danny likes to call him Johnny Athletic. I'll just go with John Krasinski. Kind enough to spend some time with us the day after the melee in Minneapolis. John, have you recovered? I'm sure you were shaken by what you saw at Target Center last night.
Yeah, it was quite a scene. I was telling Blake Moore, maybe in a hockey game, the guys get 5 minutes and they're back on the ice. But this was a big deal by NBA standards. I've seen, we always see kind of some fake skirmishes, some people that act like they might want to do something and ultimately don't really want to. But that one last night was real. Like, they really got into it. There was a lot of energy in the game that was leading to that point, and once it popped off, you're like, yep, I totally saw this coming, and there it was right in front of us. It was some real heated back and forth, more than you're used to seeing in a regular season NBA game, that's for sure.
Do you feel like the Pistons are trying to embrace their inner bad boys to invoke the salad days of that franchise back in the 90s? Because they got guys, not just Isaiah Stewart, who we know is a guy that tends to cross the line from time to time, but just the way Malik was primping and preening and just sort of making a lot out of little. It felt like they were just trying to push the envelope from the start of the game.
Yeah, they definitely have leaned into that persona all season long, and credit to them and JB Bickerstaff and whoever's kind of established the culture there, because it was the worst team in the league last year, and they are firmly in the playoffs in the East this year. It's been a remarkable turnaround. They're winning a bunch of games by doing that. But I also think that some of the theatrics are, a little bit over the top. Certainly Malik Beasley and everything that he was doing early in the game was inciting some things. Isaiah Stewart loves to get into things and stir the pot. Ron Holland is another one who does it. And so I don't think that any Pistons player or coach or their fans can be surprised when another team reacts the way that the Wolves did. The Pistons were controlling everything in that first quarter, and they were bullying and dictating and doing what they do. And finally, the Wolves had enough of it, and DiVincenzo in particular, and so they've fought back literally. And I'm actually surprised that we haven't seen even more fights from the Pistons this year. That's just the style that they play. They're very confrontational, and it invites these types of things to keep happening.
You talk about the first quarter, and it's going to get lost in everything that happened after, but for those that have watched the Wolves throughout the season, it was a very familiar start to the game last night. One team was ready to play and was more aggressive and was feeling themselves. And then there's the Wolves that just couldn't get anything going. They're down 14 after a quarter. They're missing free throws. They're turning the ball over. They're not rebounding. And it's been a kind of a frustrating thing to watch all season. And again, they got their act together. Maybe the fight woke them up. But again, as we look at these games being very important down the stretch, and then whatever the postseason run looks like, how do we work around these slow starts that have cost them a lot of games this season?
Yeah, it's a real concern, Dave. And the one interesting decision that Chris Finch has made, if you remember, in January, the Wolves had been plagued by poor starts and falling behind big. And eventually, he sort of begrudgingly changed the starting lineup and put Dante DiVincenzo in there for Mike Conley at point guard. And that seemed to help some of the issues that they were going through at the start of games. Then DiVincenzo gets hurt, and 5 games into the experiment, and Conley is back in the starting lineup. And now, after DiVincenzo has returned from his injury, he has remained on the bench. Part of that is because initially in the first couple of weeks, they were on a bit of a minutes limit with him and they wanted to ease him back in. But the other part of it is that Mike Conley is playing so much better individually, in the last month and a half, 2 months. And he is so important for Rudy Gobert that Finch has chosen to keep those two together in the starting lineup. And so I do think it's something to watch closely down the stretch here. If slow starts continue to be a problem, I don't think it's necessarily Mike Conley's fault, or, any one person's fault, but I wonder if he would consider going back to that other starting lineup if those things continue to plague them. They had an 8-game winning streak in the middle of this, so I think he wants to really see how Mike Conley does and ride that out as best as he can and see if they can just kind of nip some of these slow starts in the bud organically here.
It was a slow start for Ant as well, just 5 points in the first half. Mm-hmm. He explodes for 20 in the third quarter. Did I read he had something on his hand that's been bothering him that he removed at halftime, which, if so, certainly made a difference? What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so he had a cut on his hand, on his thumb, his right thumb, that required stitches. And he has been wearing kind of this heavy wrap. He called it a cast. It's not a cast, but it's a heavy wrap on his hand to protect those stitches. And it clearly has been bothering him. It's been bothering his shot. He has not looked very comfortable out there with that injury, trying to play through it, to his credit. But at halftime, he was really detached the entire first half. Even after the fight, he didn't really get into the game and get aggressive. And he comes out in the second half without that wrap on and played much more aggressively and looked much more comfortable, shot the ball great, 20 points in the third quarter. And after the game, he did tell us that once he took that wrap off, he felt a lot better and just felt more comfortable. He also got the stitches out of his thumb, I think, after the game. So he's feeling a lot more confident in that. We'll see over the long haul if that makes a real difference. But really over the last couple of weeks, we've kind of seen a bit of a regression from Anthony Edwards. He's not been as efficient, not been as aggressive. Defensively, he hasn't been as into it. So they need Anthony Edwards to get back to who he is as the A1 star. And the third quarter was much closer to that. We'll see if he can sustain that going forward now that wrap is off and those stitches are out.
Yeah, when Naz and Dante got escorted out, somebody had to pick up the scoring. As you say, it took him a while, but he delivered in the third quarter. And the defense really picked up in the second half. I thought Jaden McDaniels was terrific, as he tends to be on that side of the ball. And what a night for Rudy with the 25 rebounds and 19 points. And, it was Dante finding him. It was Conley finding him. When you get Rudy that dominant on the glass, that makes a big difference for this squad.
Yeah, it sure does, Sidney. They've kind of quietly been waiting for Rudy to be the defensive player of the year caliber player that he has usually been all season long. I mean, he's had stretches of good play, but the consistency level for Rudy has not been there for much of the season. And he is supposed to be one of their most consistent players. As a defensive-minded guy, he doesn't rely on hitting threes or, a lot of offense to have impact. He makes most of his money on the defensive end, and he hasn't been as sharp there. He's only averaging like 1.4 blocks a game. The 10 rebounds that he's averaging per game is the lowest since his third year in the league. And so he just hasn't been as active. But in these last 4 games, he's averaging over 16 points and over 16 rebounds per game, a double-double in each one. And he looks much closer to the Gobert that was dominant for them defensively last season. And I know, Dave, that Timberwolves fans can sometimes tear their hair out when they dump it into Rudy in the post and he has an awkward-looking layup that he misses. You say, why did they do that? Well, they do that because when he gets touches on the offensive end, he is more engaged on the defensive end. And that is not unique to him. That is the same thing for most players. And so they are trying to get him more involved offensively. He had 8 dunks against Phoenix. He had 6 dunks last night against the Pistons. And so they believe that if you get him some touches, and even if that means an empty possession every once in a while, you're going to get your investment back twofold on the defensive end. And that's shown up these last several games, and they're going to need it again tomorrow night in Denver against that monster.
All right, before we get to that matchup, where are we with the potential suspensions for either squad? When would we hear? Have you heard anything about timing or how likely the team thinks they might be facing either Naz and or Dante missing some time?
Yeah, there's certainly some concern about it. No punches were thrown that I could see in the little altercation, whatever you want to call it. But anytime it spills into the stands and fans are getting smushed by players, that's something that the league usually reacts very strongly to.
Yeah.
So I think they're bracing for some suspensions. They could be announced tonight, maybe tomorrow morning. Sometimes those things do come out as well. And I think that Dante is probably the most vulnerable to a suspension. He was the one that kind of jumped everything off when he grabbed Ron Holland and kind of took him into the stands with him. Naz could get a suspension, but he was sort of on the periphery of it, at least from a physical standpoint. So I would think those are the only two that the Wolves have to be worried about losing. Isaiah Stewart has a history of doing these things, so he could be cracked down upon maybe more heavily. But I think there's some nervous folks around Target Center kind of waiting with bated breath to see if they're going to have Dante DiVincenzo and Naz Reid tomorrow night in Denver for, another really important game. They just don't have any margin for error right now. So anytime you're down a guy or two, that would really hurt. So fingers are crossed. There's no guarantees, but I'm sure the league is looking a lot at that and does not like that this mix-up got into the fans and really kind of affected them as well.
Not ideal timing. The toughest game left on the schedule is in jeopardy of not having 2 of your key guys, or at least one. We know they've swept Denver so far. The last game was not close. Really, none of the games have been that competitive. It's another TNT game, national audience. We have to assume we are going to get Denver's A-plus effort, even if they don't match up well against the squad, and we all know what happened in the playoffs. I'm really curious to see how Denver does things differently, how they react to what's going on between these two teams, and how they play tomorrow night against the Wolves.
Yeah, I frankly, Dave, I was looking. I thought the exact same thing after their the Wolves' last win in Denver last month. Earlier this month, I believe it was. Denver had lost the first 2 games in decisive fashion of this regular season. Then they lost 6 and 7 in the playoffs. So I thought that they would really react strongly in that game, and then they ended up not really having anything for the Wolves. So I do think tomorrow night is going to be very interesting to see, because I have to think the Nuggets are going to give them their best shot just from a pride perspective, and trying to set a different tone, because there is a real good chance that these two teams could meet in the playoffs, whether it's first round, second round, something like that. And right now, the Wolves seem to have a bit of a psychological edge over the Nuggets. One is Denver has no one who can guard Anthony Edwards. Like Christian Brown can't do it. Aaron Gordon can a little bit, but then when they put Aaron Gordon on him, then that opens Julius Randle up. The other side of things, Jaden McDaniels, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, they make life hell for Jamal Murray. And so it's been a very, very good matchup for the Timberwolves. They will go into this game and to any game in the playoffs very confident about it. But yeah, I have to think Jokic and Gordon and Murray and these proud vets that the Nuggets have are going to throw everything they have at the Timberwolves just to try and gain back a little bit of confidence and momentum as the playoffs approach here.
Last one for Jonny Krasinski, lost in the aftermath of the game that had so much to remember, was the fact that one of the 12 technicals assessed was to Anthony Edwards. It was later in the game. It had nothing to do with the melee. It seemed like one of those, really, was that necessary things? And well, we all know what that means. That means now the next technical will earn him another 1-game suspension. That's meaty and that's dangerous, and you almost hope that, heading into the season finale, if they've already got a spot locked up, you almost say, get your T so you lose the last game so we don't worry about the playoffs. But it's kind of a ticking time bomb, and it's a major concern now that the next technical costs him another game.
It certainly does. It is a real concern, Dave. They have 7 games left. It would help if they won all of them. Just they're trying to get up out of the play-in tournament. I will say, the technical count resets in the playoffs. So if he doesn't pick one up over these last 7 games and goes into the playoffs and gets one, it does not meet an automatic suspension right there. But still, when you look at all of these games seemingly being as close to must win as possible, the prospects of losing Ant for any one of them with how important he is, it's a daunting one. And he had done a really good job, of limiting those technicals once he had this last suspension. But, when emotions run high, things can happen, or you could face a trigger-happy referee. There's all sorts of things can go wrong here. So I think Ant does have to be on his best behavior down the stretch here, just to give the Wolves the best chance of climbing out of the 7th spot and getting to 6 and getting that week off to prepare for the first round. It makes such a huge difference if you can do that rather than go into a must-win, play-in scenario where you got to win one of 2 games.
Great stuff, Jonny. I'm glad you escaped Target Center unscathed last night. We'll continue to read your coverage of the Wolves tomorrow night in Denver. Should be a great one. Thank you, sir.
Appreciate it, Cindy. Talk to you soon.
John Krasinski, courtesy of RBC Wealth Management, joins every Monday, kind enough to join on a day when the big guy is out. We'll pause here. Blakemore and I will bet around some of these NFL rules changes that might be talked about tomorrow morning in the NFL owners meetings. And then bottom of the hour, 4:35 or so, it's Russo Radio, Wild and Devils, 6 o'clock tonight. When we are done, we'll get the latest on the Wild from Russo. That's coming up at 4:30. Stick around. It's Sinekin for Barreiro on the Fan.
Join Muss and Miller Lite at Jimmy's in Vadnais Heights this Thursday from 5 to 7. Stop by for your final chance to win a spot in the Vikings Foundation Golf Tournament and to load up on sweet Miller Lite golf gear. Full details now, KFAN.com, keyword golf.
All right, we're back 4:24 on a Monday. Should let you know the Twins have lost today in Chicago. They were edged 9-0. Got their first hit with 2 outs in the 7th inning. Chris Paddock rocked for 9 runs in 3 1/3, gave up 3 home runs, including a couple of 3-run shots. And your Twins are off to a 0-4 start. The Bats are still in hibernation. Carlos Correa's next base hit will be his first of the season. It's ugly, and they'll go back at it tomorrow in Chicago. Also let you know the Lady Gophers are playing basketball right now at Hinkle Fieldhouse in the WBIT tournament. They're in the semis against the Gators. After one, it's 16-15 Gophers. That game is available on the Plus, 96.7. And the interesting nugget there is you've got a couple of ex-Hopkins stars going head-to-head. The Gophers, Amaya Battle. The Gators, Liv McGill, who's a freshman and their leading scorer, are on opposite sides in this semifinal matchup as the Gophers have an early 1-point advantage. I threw out the bat signal early in case anybody was in the mix, anybody was in the scrum at Target Center last night, and we have a taker. Tim from Minneapolis says he was right there in the middle of it all as Tim joins us. Tim, good afternoon. Give us the story. Where were you? How close were you? What did you see, and what did you experience?
Hey, Dave, first-time listener, long-time, first-time caller, long-time listener. Hey,
that's better.
Yeah, it was the blue-hooded sweat, right behind Dante and the blue-hooded sweatshirt. It was pretty intense down there. The game was, you could tell it had a feel of the energy was pretty physical, and and then it kind of all happened pretty quick.
So they landed in your lap. I mean, were you like squished? Were you one of the guys kind of squished? Forgive me, I don't remember.
The guy, he was the guy in front of me. Dante was sitting on him, but I was like right behind him, and it felt like, you know, I didn't want to see a direct punch to the face, so I was like, I guess my natural instinct was to try to block, you know, maybe get in the way a little bit.
Yeah.
There was a kid to the left, and I don't know, I guess I was just trying to prevent any, you know, extra contact or anything, but
it had to feel it had to feel pretty shocking, right, to have that happen right in your lap. And it wasn't one of those that gets diffused really quickly. I mean, that thing went on for quite a bit. You must have just thought, what is going on here? And I'm getting my money's worth tonight.
Yeah, at first I think my first instinct was I was like clapping my hand like together, like I was excited. But then all of a sudden, as it unfolded, I was like, whoa, this is really happening. And, so it was just, I guess, definitely have never experienced anything like it.
Yeah, so, no doubt. I appreciate you calling in and letting us know what it was like. Thanks a lot, Tim. I've seen some great videos from guys from his vantage point that had the cameras rolling. I mean, you can't get any better than that. That is, I mean, you were right there on top of it. And
my only request is I wish Nas was mic'd up, because I would have loved to hear
that would have been helpful.
What started that?
That would have been helpful.
Or what he was saying to him, because there was a lot of finger wagging, but I would love to have heard what he said.
Yeah, and just, you know, obviously glad that none of the patrons were hurt. There was a young fan that got smushed pretty good there, as we talked about earlier, and that's scary stuff, but it sounds like everybody escaped injury. Just as Johnny Athletics said, as we brace ourselves for possible suspensions, the reason we might see that, despite no punches being thrown, is when the fans are a part of it, when they get stuck in the middle of the scrum, the league does tend to treat you rather harshly for endangering your fans that are paying a pretty penny to be sitting right there on the court. Again, we'll keep an eye on whether any news breaks as far as potential suspensions. John thought it might be tonight, maybe even tomorrow morning. Feels like we should know before the day of the game, but such it is how the way the league operates. I want to go back to the NFL conversation for a minute before we welcome Russo next segment. As you all know and have probably read today, the quote-unquote tush push, which the Packers presented as a play they'd like to see banned from the league, is reportedly gaining steam that it might be voted out. And that vote might come as early as tomorrow. Now, I typically am one of those people that says, look, if you can't stop it, it's your fault. I mean, it's a play, figure it out, and don't be babies about it. But the more I've let the weeks and months and a couple of years go by, I no longer support the tush push, because I just don't think you should be able to put your hands on the quarterback and propel him forward. You know, we've seen other teams do their own version. In fact, the Packers do it with tight end Tucker Kraft, who in pre-snap motion will get right behind the center and they snap it to him. But they don't propel Tucker Kraft. No running backs behind him help move him forward. So to me, that's not an issue. It's when you got these big running backs behind Jalen Hurts, grabbing him on the backside and using their momentum to push him forward. That does not feel like the spirit of football to me. So I'm in the camp of let's make it a football play. Let Jalen do his thing, but let's not touch him from behind. Where are you?
I kind of feel the same way. It's just not. I'm torn on it though, because from a competitive standpoint, from a what's fair standpoint, I think it's a perfectly legitimate play competitively. It's as of right now a part of within the rules of the game. So part of my brain thinks, well, if you can't stop it, too bad. The other half thinks, from an entertainment perspective, from a fan's perspective, kind of stinks to watch. And it's not in as you said, the spirit of the game. So I'm lean towards get rid of it. But I am honestly torn. I'm not just trying to ride the fence just to say I did. But I don't know. I am torn about it. But if I had to make a decision, I'd probably get rid of it.
If they do vote it out, it's not going to be on the basis of, competitive advantage for a team. It's going to be, we're worried about the safety and health of our players, and we feel like more injuries can happen because of that play. I don't think there's any data that confirms that shows that we've seen injuries happen when the Eagles try to run that play, or the Buffalo Bills to a smaller extent run that play. But, I mean, we go back to that playoff game against Washington when they're at the goal line, and they tried it like
horrible 3
or 4 times, and the Commanders are trying to jump it, and at one point you hear the officials say, we are going to award them a touchdown, if they don't play correctly and not try to jump the snap. I don't know. I'd love to see them voted out. Let's just play football. Give Jalen the ball, let him go forward, but don't push him. The other one, getting a lot of feedback on this on the Bradshaw and Bryant KFAN text line at 64686, and that's the whole reseeding the teams based on record at the end of the season and not by division winners. And the texts I've got are kind of where the Vikings are, according to Ben Gessling. They don't really want to see it change because it takes away the idea of divisions meaning something. And I understand that. Division winners should get something for winning their division, even if it's a putrid division. That's how it's always been. But, man, when you see a 14-3 team, have to go on the road against a team that's 500 or one game above or below, it just doesn't feel right to me. So I'm like you. I feel like the teams with the best record should earn a home game. But what does that do for the division championship? Does that matter anymore? You look at in the NBA, divisions really don't matter anymore. It's top 8 seeds, no matter what division you're in. I don't have a problem with that, I guess. It's what you're used to. But
baseball still matters a little bit.
Yeah,
win the division. That's a lot better than having to do that stupid wild card series. I don't know. I think it all comes down to, do you think last season was an anomaly? That you had so many teams in the NFC North that were really good, had good records. Because you do see that stinker that wins the division in a bad division, semi-regularly. But I don't think we've seen a division quite as good as the NFC North was. So if you think that's more coming down the road, then maybe you do look at changing the way the seating is. But if you don't, or you think that's a one-off, then I'd say probably keep it the way it is.
And we obviously have no idea what these teams are going to look like between now and September. But right now on paper, I look at the NFC West and I go, who's the best? The Rams are probably the best team. Are they a dominant team? I don't know. The rest of that division looks fairly mediocre. That could be one of those divisions where, 9-8, 10-7 get you the win. The South is not strong. Tampa Bay has a chance to be good. They were good at the end of last year. I don't know. I see a 14-3 team that, like the Vikings, that built that record despite playing in a division like that. It feels like they should not be forced to go on the road. I think the time has come to take a look at that. And if divisions don't matter as much, for me, that's something I'm willing to give up to know that a 14-win operation deserves a home game. They just do. It just seems preposterous that you win 14 games and you got to go play a team like the Rams on the road. So we'll see. Another one that we might learn as soon as tomorrow, if there are legs to that. They did announce today one change as far as flexing Thursday night games. Like, they can now flex Sunday games to Thursday with a 21-day window, as long as teams don't have to play short weeks more than twice a year. They did that once this past year with a Broncos-Chargers game, but that's now going to be allowed, which, from television viewing, great. We want a better game to watch on Thursday night. Obviously, if you're a fan that bought tickets to a game on a Sunday and suddenly it's Thursday, you're screwed, most likely. You have to change everything. So it's not ideal for the paying customer, but it might be what the TV networks want. I think we all know the TV networks rule. All right, I went long. It's not because I don't want to talk hockey. I just wanted to get that in. Russo Radio is next. We are about an hour and a half away from Wild Hockey on this station. Can they get revenge on the New Jersey Devils? How are the injured guys doing? Will we ever see the youngster from Denver play for this team as they've reached the Final Four? Those questions and more. It's Russo Radio next on The Fan.
If you want to chime into what's happening with your favorite KFAN shows, you can make your voice heard on the Bradshaw and Bryant KFAN text line. So let us know what you have to say by texting your message to 64686. That's 64686. Standard text message and data rate supply.
4:42 on a Monday afternoon. It's the Bumper to Bumper with Barreiro program. Dan is out this week. I am Dave Sinekin sitting in today. I'll be back on Wednesday. Brett Blakemore by my side. And it's Monday. It's time for Russo Radio. Michael Russo, kind enough to join us on this Monday afternoon. Michael, been a while. How we doing?
I'm doing great. Just sitting in the beautiful Prudential Center, getting ready to see if the Wild can figure out a way to get out of the doldrums here.
Well, and it sounds like they're not going to get any reinforcement from their young phenom, as Zeev Buium has helped lead his Denver team to the Frozen Four. That doesn't happen until April 10th. So is the Buium Wild dream dead for this season, or could there still be an appearance once the postseason begins?
Well, there definitely could be an appearance. They're going to sign him, and they will burn the first year just like Brock Faber. Just the way the Frozen Four now situates and where the Wild are, even if he lost the semifinal game, and they signed him right away. Like I don't see him joining the Wild in Calgary or Vancouver. So most likely he'd be joining the Wild for that first practice after the break, which is also the last regular season practice. And maybe, he's from San Diego. He obviously knows the Ducks well. Maybe makes his NHL debut against Anaheim. But as disappointed as Wild fans were yesterday, that I'm sure because they wanted him more imminently than a couple of weeks from now. I think it's great for Zeev to, after back-to-back gold medals, to have a chance to win back-to-back NCAA championships. I think it's good to have a winner come into this organization that's going to have a ton of confidence. And I think the big thing is whether or not he plays. Like, he'll play that regular season finale, but to throw him right away into the playoffs, it's not exactly the Wild style. We'll have to see the Wild's injury situation at that point. But if they're, seven defensemen are healthy in front of them, or especially the top six, and just the different element that maybe guys like Jonny Merrill and Zach Bogosian would bring to a playoff series, I just don't see the Wild just throwing them in there. But obviously there's a lot of runway left before they have to make that decision.
Wild getting set for the second half of a home-and-home with the Devils, this time on the road. Last time we saw them play, it wasn't pretty. It was a lousy start. John Hines said they weren't mentally or physically where they need to be. What sense do you get that they got the message? What's it been like for that squad as they get set for tonight's game?
They better rebound. I mean, last night was not good. And they've had a lot of those, not only this season, but lately. And, I just think that, again, without Kaprizov and without Ek, they have to work so hard to win every single game that eventually, they were able to do it for a couple games. But you have a couple guys that aren't bringing it one game in this sport. If you're not on the same page, especially in your own end, you're going to have real trouble. And I think that's what happened the other night. We saw it against the St. Louis Blues a couple weeks ago as well. It just feels like there's always those games after a couple of games where they play really well that they eventually have a clunker. And I just think and last game was clearly that. It was a very disappointing end to the homestand with St. Louis absolutely on their tail right now and Vancouver and Calgary coming strong. So they've got to figure out a way on this road trip to right the ship and get back to getting points in the standings.
Hey, Russo, Brett here. The last game against the Devils, it got chippy, it got very physical, it got emotional. Do you see any of that kind of carrying over to the Prudential Center tonight?
Probably. I think that the Wild are going to come out and play a hard game of hockey. And the one thing with the Devils is they got some big, strong guys, especially on the back end, that'll stand up to that. And we know, obviously, the history that Brendan Dillon, when he was with Winnipeg for years, has with the Wild, and he was one of those guys that was really, getting into it with Hartman and Foligno last game, and I think that we'll see that again. Kovacevic, I'll tell you what, he impressed me the other night. The way that he stood up to Foligno, and he's somebody that especially after being called out by Sheldon Keefe last week, and being told that he needed to play better, you just knew that he was going to play a hard game of hockey. And if you hear in the background right now, those are all the Devils playing sewer ball, and they seem fired up as of right now. So I do see, knowing that the Wild are going to have to come out and establish a physical tone and get on their toes tonight, unlike the other night, I think that this will be a chippy game, especially, as you mentioned, Brett, the fact that, it's almost like a little playoff series where you play a couple of days ago, obviously some bad blood there that was seen on the ice that will probably chip into this game.
What was your opinion on the embellishment call against Foligno? Was it embellishment? And what's your thoughts on kind of getting a penalty for cross-checking, but then also having an embellishment as well. Is it embellishment or is it not?
I don't think it was embellishment. I think he was hitting the lower back, and I think that he realized how close he was to the wall and bailed out on the play. And I think anybody, a referee that would have any sense of the game, would know that. I mean, I don't think that was him trying to draw a call. I think that was him realizing that he was pushed right into the lower back and could have gone straight into the boards and decided to just go down. Obviously, he didn't agree with the call. I didn't like the call. I know that a lot of people that were watching the game probably agreed with me that maybe had better pictures too. That happened in the far corner of where I sit. But, the way that Foligno explained it after the game made total sense to me is that he sort of admitted that he tried to bail out because he was worried about where he was when he felt that push on the back of his breezers. And there's been so many edicts, especially after what Brendan Dillon did to Kaprizov, last season, was that? Yeah. That not to stop basic cross-checking in the corner in the lower back because it could be catastrophic, to be frank. And I think that, this was not, Marcus Foligno is not one that usually goes down and tries to draw a call. I think that all of us that have watched him, know that.
What's the latest on Kaprizov and Ekwatch? I know they're in New Jersey. They're not going to play tonight, but what's the kind of the status and the latest buzz around 97 and 14?
Yeah, they were both on the ice this morning. Kaprizov, whether that happened today or tomorrow, is going to see his doctor in New York. My guess is it's going to happen tomorrow. And the goal is to, get the next time frame and to essentially get cleared to start taking contact in practice. So, the Wild have ice scheduled tomorrow, but they're not supposed to practice. So my guess is that Kaprizov and Ek will be on the ice here actually at Prudential Center and then go into New York with the team, and then he'll go see his doctor, which is the one that he found in New York. So that's my gut. And then the hope is that he's cleared, and then Eriksson Ek also has to get cleared by the doctors as well. They'll start getting contact. And, if I had to guess, with no full team practices until that day, I believe it is Tuesday, so 2 days after the Devils game, after the Stars game, before the San Jose game, if they get a full practice that day, it just wouldn't shock me if we see them at least in the San Jose game and they play the last 4 games of the regular season. But we'll see. That's total conjecture. But they certainly seem to be progressing. Like watching Kirill on the ice, Brett, you and I were talking just informally before we went on the air. Like if this was up to him, he would have been back weeks ago, but it's not up to him. He's got a strict timetable from this doctor, who's obviously conservative with this, with this. In fact, 3 weeks ago when he went visit him for a checkup while we were out in Vancouver and Seattle, he was basically told you're pushing it too hard off the ice and to, try to take a step back. And so I think that Kirill just desperately wants to get back in the lineup. Same thing with Eriksson Ek. And I think that we're starting to get closer to at least seeing him on the ice. And you just hope in these next 3 or 4 games that they can get some points and make sure that it's not too late.
We're talking with Michael Russo. Of course, you can read his stuff at The Athletic. We like to call him Russo Radio around this station. Michael, the postseason has always felt like a foregone conclusion for this squad. They're still in really good position, but people are barking at their heels a little bit. And do you get any sense from the guys in the locker room that they're watching the standings? They're getting a little concerned about how things are going. How much scoreboard watching do you sense is being done by the players?
I think it's impossible not to. I mean, you play a game and you go home and turn on the TV and you see it. It's no longer open up the newspaper and read the box score. It's turn on NHL Network, and everybody knows. And everybody knows right now the St. Louis Blues they've won 9 in a row. They had a pretty easy schedule. Then they waltzed into Colorado the other night and edged them out and rallied back for a 2-1 win. And those were 2 huge points. Tonight is the Wild's game in hand on the Blues. So you want to try to, maintain possession and get 2 points ahead. But right now, they are tied in the standings with the Blues. If they obviously fall to 8th, right now at least, they would play Winnipeg in the first round. The Wild haven't beaten Winnipeg in 3 years. 8 in a row they've lost. So that's not good. But let's be honest, the Wild, even healthy, are going to be underdogs in any playoff series that they play. They've been terrible against Vegas. They've been terrible against Dallas, and those are the 3 teams that they would likely play in the playoffs. Because again, Vegas is if you finish 7th, you're playing Vegas. It's almost guaranteed at this point. And the question is, does Dallas have a way to catch Winnipeg and win the conference? And if that happens, maybe the Wild, if they're 8th, they go down to Dallas rather than Winnipeg. But There's no doubt tension right now, the way that they've played here in the last, several weeks since the Four Nations, especially. And they've got to get themselves, they've tried to keep their head above water without these guys. It's a lot of, when you're playing weeks and months without Kaprizov and Eriksson Ek, it just eventually catches up to you. You just saw what happened with Edmonton without Draisaitl and McDavid. We're seeing what's happened for the most part with New Jersey without Jack Hughes and Dougie Hamilton. These are big pieces, and when you're already a team that's $15 million under the cap anyway, you take two guys out of the lineup and you're replacing them with Devin Shore and Brandon Gantz, and that's just not that's not the equivalent of Eriksson Ek and Kirill Kaprizov. And eventually, you can win some games, and really, the end of December and early January without Kaprizov, they did a really good job of gaining points in the standings. And then once January 9th hit, it's been really they've been one of the worst teams in the league since January 9th.
Well, you said the quiet part out loud that even healthy, they're going to be at the very least underdogs against Vegas or Winnipeg. Do you think, looking back now, because it looks like they're going to get at least a little bit of runway, which is what Kaprizov wanted, and do you think now that we're a little bit away from the trade deadline and it looks like they will come back, that it was worth giving them, at least as it stands now, or do you think it would have been better off in hindsight maybe shutting them down on LTIR and trying to add to this team so maybe they're not such big underdogs in the first round?
Well, that was my opinion, especially, the way this team was going. Even if it wasn't going to be them, it could have been somebody else at some point. You don't have to, say who that player was at that point. You just deal with it. And the other thing is, look, there was no big names really traded that the Wild were going to be able to go after except for Brock Nelson. And they were the equivalent of Brock Nelson at the trade deadline would have been trading, Danilo Urov and a first-round pick. And I don't think any Wild fan would ever say the Wild should have done that, especially for a guy that they're going to try to sign on July 1 anyway. So, but that doesn't mean that you have to go out and get a $9 million player. My only, when I had that back and forth with Billy, my only contention was go get somebody, an NHLer. So Wild fans and the Wild, don't have to watch these minor league pluggers that are coming up and literally doing nothing. I mean, not generating points, they're basically eating minutes. And so, when you can get a Nico Sturm for a 4th or 5th round pick at the price that he was, my contention was at least say at, the Ek, come back at the beginning of the playoffs. But that would be hard to do. Like right now, these guys are skating. They desperately want to get back in the lineup. So if you're in Bill Guerin's shoes, how do you go to Kirill Kaprizov now and say, hey, I know you're ready to come back and you want to come back, but we can't play you because we traded for Nico Sturm. So you can see it both ways. I guess the debate that I was having with Billy that day is all of us have for years watched teams take advantage of this LTIR loophole, and it felt like here was a time where the Wild could, and they just didn't take advantage of it. But they're dealing with a lot of cap gymnastics right now. I mean, even just to sign Zeev Buium, if they had lost yesterday, would have been an absolute nightmare this next week. Because one thing that would have happened here that Wild fans would have freaked out about is, especially when they're watching Jimmy Snuggerud sign right away and Ryan Leonard sign away and Gabe Perreault sign right away, is that with Kaprizov and Eriksson Ek out, the only way they could have had Zeev Buium on the lineup is to send Shore and Gantz down. Well, then you don't have any forwards left, so they couldn't do that. So essentially, until they got a firmer timeline on Kaprizov and Eriksson Ek, I don't think they were going to be able to sign Zeev right away anyway. So he would have had to just sit here and bake for probably, 5 or 6 or 7 days until they're ready to come back. So that's how much of a juggling act this cap situation has been this year because of injuries from pretty much day one of the season. So it's easy for me to say on the sideline, shut down Ek or Kaprizov. But they're the ones dealing with it every day. And it was a real tough situation that they found themselves in. And as Billy said, he knew the timelines and they are going to get, unfortunately, it's not going to be 10 games left in the season, but it looks like it'll be 3 or 4.
Michael, we appreciate the time, as always. We'll look forward to your coverage of the game tonight, see if the Wild can get some revenge on the Devils at Prudential Center. Looks like they're having fun already an hour before they drop the puck. Thank you, my man.
They're certainly loose. See you, Dave. See you, Brett.
Take it easy. Michael Russo Radio. What are they doing? What kind of ball? What's the game they're playing?
It's with a soccer ball. It's just like they're juggling it back and forth to each other. And if you miss it, you're out, basically.
So they are definitely loosey-goosey. You can tell. They're
having a good time, the Devils.
They are absolutely having some fun, anxious to try to make it 2 in a row over the Wild. You'll hear that game about an hour from now when we are done at 6 o'clock. No pregame. We'll take you right to the start of Wild and Devils at 6 o'clock right here on the Fan. We'll pause here. Top 5 at 5 is next.